The Duke of Edinburgh's funeral is to take place next Saturday at St George's Chapel in Windsor. The congregation will be limited to 30, however the ceremony will be televised.
Fire! 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 Fire!
Earlier today, there were gun salutes across the country and around the world to mark the Duke's death yesterday. Prince Philip was by the Queen's side for more than 70 years. The royal family mourns the loss of a beloved husband and father.
If you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
I think he'd probably want to be remembered as, as an individual in his own right, really.
We'll bring you all the details of the ceremonial royal funeral and reflect on the many tributes that have been paid across the world. A minute's silence was held for the Duke at Aintree ahead of this afternoon's Grand National. And we'll look back on aspects of the Duke's life, including his love of sport. We'll look at Prince Philip's decades of campaigning for nature and the environment. Hello, good afternoon. Buckingham Palace has announced that the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh will take place next Saturday at 3 p.m. at St George's Chapel in Windsor. At the same 1 minute's silence will be held across the UK. The funeral will not be accessible to the public, with the congregation limited to 30, but it will be televised live. Today, gun salutes took place to mark the Duke's death across the whole of the UK, in Gibraltar and from Navy warships at sea. Batteries fired 41 rounds, one every minute. Prince Philip, who died yesterday, aged 99, served as a naval officer during the Second World War. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has our first report.
At midday, in the capital cities of the four nations of the United Kingdom, 41 gun salutes were fired. And for a man who served in the Royal Navy in the Second World War and later, guns were fired in tribute aboard several warships and in Gibraltar, home to the Royal Navy's Gibraltar Squadron. At Windsor Castle, the Earl of Wessex arrived with his wife to join the Queen in the family's mourning as officials put the finishing touches to the plans for the Duke's funeral. It will take place at 3 o'clock next Saturday afternoon at St George's Chapel inside Windsor Castle. No part of the funeral will be accessible to the public. The Duke's coffin will be borne in a ceremonial procession from the castle's state apartments to the chapel. The coffin will be borne on a Land Rover which the Duke helped to design. Members of the royal family will walk behind the coffin. There will be a national 1 minute silence when the coffin reaches the chapel at 3 o'clock. Inside the chapel, the congregation will be limited to 30 in strict compliance with COVID regulations. Members of the public are being discouraged from going to Windsor. The best place to watch it all will be on television, said a palace spokesman. For the royal family, it is a period of mourning. And from the family, in a BBC programme broadcast last night, personal tributes have been paid by 3 of the Duke's children.
His energy was astonishing in supporting my mama and doing it for such a long time, and in some extraordinary way being able to go on doing it for so long.
His appreciation of how he could help the Queen always seemed to be present in terms of supporting her, because she was very young when she became Queen, and it needed to be, I think, a double act for a lot of that time in order to allow her to take on that role.
My father was always a great source of support and encouragement. It was and guidance all the way through. and never trying to curtail any of the activities or anything that we wanted to try and do, but always encourage that. And always remember and thank him for that.
Well, you know, he didn't suffer fools gladly. And so you had to... So if you said anything, you know, that was in any way ambiguous, he'd say, well, make up your mind, you know. So perhaps it made one choose your words carefully, if you know what I mean. He was very good at showing you how to do things and instruct you in various things.
I think I will best remember him as always being there and a person you could bounce off ideas, but if you were having problems, you could always go to him and know that he would listen and try to help.
What he's done has amounted to an astonishing achievement, I think.
In Windsor, people are placing flowers, despite the request that this shouldn't be done. Many want to show appreciation for the Duke and solidarity with the family.
He was the consort to the Queen for so long. He faced so much criticism and he handled it spectacularly. For me, he was the image of the monarchy and the image of that stability.
When we came to this country, we were quite young at that time, and it means a lot to us as well. It's grieving, especially the Queen, his partner, his companion, you know.
So yeah, kind of representing the younger age and respecting the country, really.
After their meeting with the Queen, the Earl and Countess of Wessex departed from Windsor Castle. How was the Queen? She'd been amazing, the Countess said.
Nicholas Witchell reporting there, and I'll speak to him in just a moment. But first, our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph, who's outside Windsor Castle for us this afternoon. And Daniela, the funeral being planned very much in accordance with the Duke's wishes.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. This is the funeral that the Duke of Edinburgh wanted for himself and for his family. He had been involved in the planning of his funeral and had approved the details of it ahead of his death. So very much something in his image, and what Buckingham Palace have said this afternoon, it will be a funeral service to celebrate what they call a remarkable life. So next Saturday afternoon, the Duke of Edinburgh's coffin will be carried into St George's Chapel by the Royal Marines. It will be draped in his own standard. On top will be a single wreath of flowers and his naval cap and sword. Walking behind the coffin will be senior members of the royal family. But the funeral itself will abide by COVID regulations, and that will mean a personal guest list of just 30 people. Although the bearer party and the clergy will not be counted, they will be in addition to that 30 because they are seen as carrying out a professional duty on the day. Now, as Nick said in his piece, it has been really busy here at Windsor today, but the message from both the royal family and the police could not be clearer. They do not want people to come to Windsor next Saturday. They want people to stay at home and watch the funeral service on their televisions to abide by COVID regulations. And just one more piece of information that has been confirmed today. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, will be coming to his grandfather's funeral, but his wife Meghan, who is pregnant, will be staying in the United States on the advice of her doctors.
OK, Daniela, thank you. And let's go live now to Buckingham Palace and our correspondent there, Tim Muffet. Tim, you've been speaking to those who, despite those restrictions, of course, have come to pay their respects today. They've been telling you why.
That's right, Kate. If it weren't for the pandemic, it's fair to assume that the crowds here at Buckingham Palace would have been much larger. But smaller crowds are what the palace wants. People are being encouraged to pay their respects via an online condolence book. That said, throughout the day, there has been a steady stream of people with cards, with flowers and with messages of respect. An orderly queue was formed. People were encouraged to socially distance, and once they'd laid their flowers or their cards in front of the palace, they were then encouraged to move on. really struck by the number of families who were here, many with young children. And a lot of those parents said they were really keen for those young people to appreciate fully what the Duke did for young people, not just through the charities which he supported, but also, of course, through the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Many of the cards I've been looking at, they have a number of moving tributes. Here's a selection. May your soul rest in peace. Thank you. Your service will never be forgotten. And one says, fair winds and following seas. Now that's a nautical blessing, often used by sailors to wish someone a safe journey, reflecting, of course, the Duke's extraordinary service to the Royal Navy.
Tim, thank you so much from Buckingham Palace there. And our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me now. So many people paying their respects, Nick, over the last 24 hours. Today, then, more details revealed about what will be a royal ceremonial funeral.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Despite all the exhortations for people not to gather, not to place flowers, a good many people feel that they just want to do that. They want to pay their own personal tribute, either by leaving a card, leaving flowers at the palace or at Windsor Castle. So yes, a week today, what is termed a ceremonial royal funeral. It's not a state funeral, it's one level down from a state funeral. He was never going to get that because that is for heads of state and exceptional others. The last state funeral we had in this country, of course, was way back in 1965 for the wartime Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. But this, as Daniela was saying, is going to be very much in the style that he will have wanted and specified with a minimum of fuss, even less fuss, of course, because of the COVID requirements. But nonetheless, it will reflect his wishes and recognise his life of service. It will all take place within the castle. It won't be possible for members of the public to see any part of the funeral procession or the service itself. Nothing will be visible to people who attempt to gather in Windsor. So Buckingham Palace and the authorities very keen to say, please don't gather in Windsor. As the spokesman said, the best place to watch this is at home and watching it on television. But what will happen is this 8-minute ceremonial procession from the state apartments down to St George's Chapel, with the Prince of Wales leading principal members of the royal family walking behind this Land Rover, a Land Rover which the Duke had a hand in actually designing himself. Very much his mark all over this this procedure. As Daniela was saying, the Duke of Sussex will attend, but he will have to go through 5 days of quarantine at home and pass a COVID test. The Duchess of Sussex not attending because, of course, she is pregnant. And a period of national mourning. Flags will fly at half-mast until after the funeral is over. So much less in terms of public participation because of the COVID situation, but nonetheless an opportunity for the royal family to pay their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh for his many decades of service.
Indeed so. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Well, tributes to the Duke have continued to flow in from around the world. As Australians woke on Saturday to the news of Prince Philip's death, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said his life had been one of duty, service, loyalty and honour. Our Sydney correspondent Shaima Khalil sent this report.
Honouring a life of duty and service. A sign of respect for a man who for decades has had a long and enduring relationship with this country. The Prime Minister paid tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh, whose presence, he said, was a reminder of the stability needed in a world that can often be uncertain.
Memories of him will, of course, tell stories of his candour and a unique and forceful and authentic personality. But above all, he was a man who was steadfast, who could be relied upon, always standing by his Queen.
Prince Philip's military services first brought him here in 1940. But it was in 1954 that he arrived alongside the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth on an historic visit, the first by a reigning monarch to Australia.
Troops and representatives of many Australasian lands.
The Duke visited more than 20 times and has fostered a close connection with the country and its people. At times, taking a moment to enjoy the famed Aussie lifestyle.
Throughout the decades, Prince Philip was patron to nearly 50 organizations here. But it's his character, his candor, his ability to be himself that have endeared him to so many Australians.
there, yeah, there's a restaurant.
More than 700,000 young Australians have taken part in the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Sarah Yolko started when she was 16.
I don't think I would have been able to actually participate in community events or participate in physical activity and learn these new skills that I got to learn without the award kind of pushing me to do that.
The Duke was also a well-known figure in New Zealand. He appreciated a traditional welcome, but his focus was always on supporting young people.
For over 50 years, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards have connected him to thousands of New Zealand young people. And of course, perhaps most importantly, he has served in support of Her Majesty the Queen for many, many years in her service to New Zealand, the Commonwealth, and indeed the world.
In Australia, the Duke of Edinburgh has always been warmly welcomed, and he'll be fondly remembered by the politicians and the public alike.
Well, many more tributes have been paid to the Duke of Edinburgh from across the world. Kenya's President Kenyatta said the Duke had been a towering symbol of family values. Prince Philip was visiting Kenya, of course, with his wife when her father, King George VI, died and she ascended the throne. Africa correspondent Catherine Bayurahanga sent this report from there.
The royal visitors stepped off into the hot sunshine of Nairobi.
In 1952, a young Princess Elizabeth and her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, were at the start of a tour, standing in for her father, King George VI, who was too ill to travel. The couple took in the sights, but little did they know that destiny was waiting in the wings.
Half an hour after their arrival came the first engagement.
Nearly all the people they met here have passed away. But in 2015, the BBC spoke to a man who spent time with them.
She was a young, beautiful lady, and her husband, he was a big man.
And it was here at the Treetops Lodge that everything changed for the couple. During an overnight stay, the princess became the monarch after her father died. Following their stay here at Treetops, the Queen and the Duke were catapulted into 70 years of service, not only to the United Kingdom, but the Commonwealth as well. And this was the start of years of friendship and partnership that the Prince had with this continent. As the Queen's consort, the Prince accompanied her on numerous tours in Africa. The first years of her reign saw a rise in independence struggles, and the British Empire retreated. Prince Philip often represented her at ceremonies to hand over power, like this one in Nairobi. Today, on the world's youngest continent, the Prince has left another legacy. Over 400,000 people in Africa are currently taking part in the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, transforming their lives.
I think the fact that he was able to come up with a program that changes life, because even hundreds of years to come, I can tell you that this program will still be in existence.
30 years after that fateful visit, the royal couple returned to Treetops. They had experienced so much, but perhaps this place represented the moment that defined both their lives.
Well, Prince Philip will be remembered too as one of the first people in the public eye to champion the cause of conservation. For nearly 20 years, he was president of the World Wildlife Fund, now the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Even after stepping down, he remained an active campaigner, as our science and environment editor David Shookman reports.
Nature was one of Prince Philip's great loves, and the need to conserve it became a lifelong passion. He fought not just for endangered species, but for the whole of the natural world.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
From his earliest official visits around the globe, this one to Antarctica, wildlife was always a theme. He used his position to inspire younger generations, In this lecture for 2,000 children, many of the pictures were his.
I don't think I'll tell you which are mine, but if you ever see a very bad one, you'll know.
An emerging theme was our responsibility.
If we as humans have got this power of life and death, not just life and death, but extinction and survival of other species of life, then we ought to exercise it with some sort of moral sense. I mean, why make something extinct if we don't have to?
He authored or contributed to a series of dramatically titled books about threats to nature. And he took advantage of his access to governments the world over. He helped to set up the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and he led it for years. On a visit to the pandas in China, he highlighted the need to save them and their habitats. And he went live on television with David Attenborough to make that point.
The panda range has been squeezed between mountains on one side and human encroachment on the other.
His importance to conservation worldwide has been absolutely huge. You can go anywhere in the world, and he will know where you have to make the connection, where you have to put the pressure, what you have to do. And he's very practical in those terms.
But he didn't always help himself.
There was the tiger.
In the 60s, he joined tiger hunts, and he once shot a tiger in India. This image was to remain controversial. It was later said that tigers weren't considered endangered back then. But Prince Philip did have his own distinct views. He supported fox hunting and the shooting of game birds, which set him at odds with many environmentalists.
There is an advantage in people wanting to shoot, because if you have a game species, you want it to survive because you want to have some more next year. It's exactly like a farmer. You want to crop it. You don't want to exterminate it.
So this was a man with his own brand of environmental concern. And he did not like being labelled.
Would you describe yourself as a green? As green?
No.
Why not?
Well, because I think that there's a difference between being concerned for the conservation of nature and being a bunny hugger. When I was president of WWF, I got more letters about people, the way animals were treated in zoos, than about any concern for the survival of a species. But people can't get their heads around the idea of a species surviving.
And as far back as 1970, with a young Prince Charles by his side, he was typically forthright about the need to be realistic in the fight for nature.
After all, even naturalists drive cars occasionally. And having accepted that, we must go a step further and recognize that compromises have to be reached. Disagreement is inevitable, but the groups must go on meeting, because we have simply got to hammer out answers to problems which are going to affect all life in these islands for generations to come.
In many ways, Prince Philip was ahead of his time, using his fame as a royal to raise awareness of conservation. An early environmentalist who did not want to be called that, a unique campaigner for a cause that's ever more relevant.
Well, we can take a look at some other news now, and first a look at the latest government figures on COVID. There were 2,589 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, 2,710 new cases were reported per day in the past week. Across the UK, the latest figures showed 2,862 people were in hospital with coronavirus. 40 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average, in the past week, 36 deaths were announced every day. The total number is now 127 and 80. As for vaccinations, 106,878 people have had their first dose of a COVID vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, bringing the total to 32,010,244, over 60% then of the adult population. 6,991,310 people have had both doses of the vaccine now. And in other news, 14 police officers have been injured after a further night of violence in Northern Ireland. Stones, bottles and petrol bombs were thrown at police in Belfast even after loyalist groups urged their supporters to stay at home following the death of Prince Philip. India's reported a record number of daily coronavirus infections, more than 145,000, with 794 deaths, the largest daily tally in more than 5 months. The numbers being blamed on a reluctance to wear masks and on crowding. The situation has been worsened by a general shortage of vaccines, drugs and hospital beds. Thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes on the Caribbean island of St Vincent after a volcano erupted yesterday, sending huge clouds of ash and smoke miles high into the air. The island's Prime Minister said no one had been hurt. Evacuees have been taken to cruise ships in safer parts of the island. We will have more on the Duke of Edinburgh later in the programme. First, though, we'll have some sport and continued tributes to Prince Philip at Aintree today, where for the first time a female jockey has won the Grand National. Carthy Nyana-Seagram is at the BBC Sports Centre. Carthy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, there has been a 2-minute silence at sports events across the country, including at Aintree today as a tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh. And in the last few minutes, as Kate mentioned, the Grand National has been won by Manila Times, ridden by Rachel Blackmore, who becomes the first female jockey to win the Grand National. Andy Swiss reports.
A day when racing paid its respects. The jockeys wearing black armbands and the flags at half-mast. The Duke of Edinburgh had been an honorary member of the Jockey Club, and before the first race, Aintree fell silent.
Well, the atmosphere here at Aintree is understandably subdued. Also because there are no spectators here. COVID restrictions mean that for the first time in the Nationals' history, it's behind closed doors.
But for the 40 riders, there was the chance of one of racing's most prestigious prizes. And at 5:15, they set out over Aintree's fences. And what followed was a sporting milestone, as Rachel Blackmore on Manila Times led into the closing stages. No female jockey had ever won the Grand National until this, as Blackmore held on for history. Delight for the 31-year-old Irish rider and a landmark moment. A Grand National in unprecedented circumstances has produced an unprecedented victory. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Aintree.
There was a surprise result in the Premier League with leaders Manchester City beaten 2-1 at home by Leeds United, who were down to 10 men for the second half. In the Scottish Premiership, second place Celtic thrashed Livingston 6-0. There were also wins for Aberdeen, Dundee United and Motherwell, while Kilmarnock and Ross County drew 0-0. Newly crowned champions Rangers play tomorrow. Rugby Union and defending champions England have defeated Italy 67 points to 3 in the Women's Six Nations. England scored 9 tries as they reached the final of the tournament. Joe Curry reports.
Stepping out in Parma, knowing a win against Italy would send England through to the Six Nations Grand Final. A moment of reflection, and then it was down to business. Against their resolute hosts, England knew they'd have to take their chances, and Emily Scarratt did just that, first showing her power and then her pace to put the visitors ahead. A moment later, and almost an identical move.
The ball's loose, and once again, an Italian error.
This time Meg Jones with a quick reaction and legs. Vicky Fleetwood in the right place to claim the try. After the restart, and England upped the pace, running in another 7 tries. The pick of the bunch being this individual effort from Abby Dow, her second of the afternoon.
Oh, it's brilliant from Abby Dow. Sensational from England as well.
Whilst Claudia McDonald also got on the score sheet with a dummy and a dramatic dive. Scarratt, almost faultless with the boot, added 8 conversions from 9. England fly home with a bonus point win and will now look to defend their title in the tournament decider in a fortnight's time. Joe Curry, BBC News.
Golf, and England's Justin Rose leads the Masters by 1 stroke as they head into the 3rd round. Rose tees off in a couple of hours as he looks to hold on to his lead on day 3 at Augusta National. He carded a level par 72 on day 2. Wales against Ireland in the Women's Six Nations kicked off at 5 o'clock. Details of that game, plus the quarter-finals of the European Champions Cup and Rugby League's Challenge Cup are on the BBC Sport website, Kate.
Carthy, thank you very much indeed. You are watching an extended programme from BBC News marking the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. His elder son, Prince Charles, has been leading the family tributes to his father, and within the past few minutes he gave a statement from his home in Highgrove in Gloucestershire.
Good afternoon. I particularly wanted to say that my father, I suppose the last 70 years, has given the most remarkable, devoted service to the Queen, to my family, and to the country, and also to the whole of the Commonwealth. And as you can imagine, my family and I miss my father enormously. He was a much-loved and appreciated figure. And apart from anything else, I can imagine, and we're so deeply touched by the number of other people here and elsewhere around the world in the Commonwealth who also, I think, share our loss and our sorrow. And my dear papa was a very special person who, I think, above all else, would have been amazed by the reaction and the touching things that have been said about him. And from that point of view, we are, my family, deeply grateful for all that. It will sustain us in this particular loss and at this particularly sad time. Thank you. Thank you.
Prince of Wales there, and with that Nick Whitchell joins us again. Nick, that was a very heartfelt, very personal message, it seemed to me.
Yes, a tribute on behalf of the whole royal family, as the Prince of Wales did, I recall, after the death of his grandmother, the Queen Mother. He now, of course, is the senior male figure within the royal family. A figure of that much more authority now with the passing of his father. And yes, talking about my dear papa was a very special person who will be amazed at the scale of the reaction to his death. And, you know, it's no secret that the Prince of Wales has had difficulties in the past with his father. They were such different people in terms of their temperament, as the Duke once said, "I'm a pragmatist, he's a romantic." They just had a different approach to life. But I think that in recent months in particular, they had more opportunity to speak to each other during the pandemic, during isolation with the Duke at Windsor with the Queen. The Prince was the only member of the royal family who visited him in hospital during the month-long stay in February and March, and I think that there was an opportunity perhaps for them to look back and reflect and to have real father and son conversations that perhaps hadn't been possible at an earlier stage in their lives. But there is no doubt, I mean, the love that exists within the family is as exists within any family, which becomes sharper and more accentuated as a father figure approaches the end of his life. And I think that is what has happened here. And the Prince of Wales, as we heard, talked about a much-loved figure and the loss and the sorrow that is felt within the family, and an opportunity for him to express appreciation on behalf of the royal family to all those who have paid their tributes, not only in this country but around the world.
No, indeed so. Thank you, Nick. And on that, we can get more from our correspondent John Kay, who's at Highgrove now in Gloucestershire, home, of course, to the Prince of Wales. And John, as Nick was just saying, a very heartfelt message from Prince Charles that we've just heard.
It was, Kate. It was formal in some ways, and yet what struck me is that this was very much a son talking about the very recent loss of his father. The language very personal. It was delivered without notes, in one take, straight to camera. This is what Prince Charles wanted to say for himself and on behalf of his family. Talking to the country, talking to the Commonwealth, but talking of my dear papa, talking about how he would miss his father enormously, talking about the family being so deeply touched, about his father being a very special person, describing the family's loss and sorrow. And as Nick was just saying there, you know, much has been said and written over the years about the very different characters of these two men, of father and son. And yet when you stand here at Highgrove, you're also reminded of those similarities as well. I mean, this is where Prince Charles comes to have privacy and to have peace and to enjoy things like farming and heritage, polo just down the road, all passions and interests and loves that he shared with his father. I'm sure that will be in his mind at the moment as well. And I think that overriding sense in the statement we've just heard from the Prince of Wales, gratitude to the Commonwealth, gratitude to the country, and the fact that the Prince of Wales said that his father would be amazed by the public's reaction. Kate.
John, thank you so much. John Kay there. And we can cross now to my colleague Jane Hill, who's outside Windsor Castle for us. Jane.
Thanks very much, Kate. Yes, welcome back to Windsor Castle. And very striking there, hearing Nick say that he felt the Duke would be surprised perhaps by the reaction to his passing. It is fair to say that it has been very, very busy here in Windsor today. The crowds who are here thinning out slightly now that it's getting colder, but there's been a large number of people here over the course of the day, lots of people bringing flowers, despite those exhortations from the palace for people not to gather, for people not to break COVID rules. There have been an awful lot of people here at Windsor Castle today. And here outside the castle alongside me is a man of many talents, but among many other things, Giles Brandreth, welcome, because you are a biographer of the Duke, you knew him. And I'm touched that you were just saying to me you thought he'd be almost taken aback by the numbers.
I think he would be. I think he'd be startled by the response just here, and nationally and indeed internationally as well. Of course, he was someone who travelled more around the world than any other member of the royal family, been to more Commonwealth countries, more countries internationally. But here at home, to find so many people responding, people of all ages too, I think it's for two reasons. One, a feeling about the Queen, you know, the Queen alone now. But two, it's a century. It's all our lives. And so people are reflecting on that. But also young people have been here. I've met several people who've done the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme.
Yes.
They feel personally engaged in this man's extraordinary life. And being here in Windsor, which I know he loved, I mean, this is Windsor. Windsor Castle is where his mother was born in 1885, and here is where he is going to come to rest next Saturday. And what will be a poignant, almost private funeral, with just 30 people there. The focus will be, of course, on the Queen, Elizabeth alone now, and it'll remind us that this is simply a family occasion, though he was a public man.
And the fact that we are told so many of the funeral details have been arranged by him, agreed by him, that curious addition of a Land Rover that he wanted adapted to carry the coffin. I mean, you knew him. Is that?
He was Mr. Pragmatism. He loved the nuts and bolts of things, making things work. And the idea of adapting his own Land Rover for his own funeral would have appealed to him hugely. And curiously, the pandemic, though of course much regretted by him, his last public statement a year ago was about the pandemic, saluting the bin men, among others. It played into his hands because he always wanted a quiet funeral without fuss. He didn't want a state occasion, and he's going to get a quiet funeral. He's going to do it his way.
Yes, and it's hard. You reflect on it being a century. It is hard, I think, for all of us to think of the Queen waking up this morning a widow. I mean, he'd been ill, but there's still that. They have been together for so many decades.
They were both great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria, whose statue is at the end of the road here. Both great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria. They met in the 1930s, they fell in love in the 1940s, and from 1947 until Friday, they were together. And of course, we've heard repeatedly over the last 24 hours her saying he was my strength and stay, but he also made her laugh. He was her good companion, and so of course our thoughts must be with her and with the family, hearing Prince Charles there with his poignant words of sadness for the whole family.
Yes, and I have spoken to so many people here today, people who knew him through charity work, who knew him here in Windsor. It is really striking, the number of people who've said he did have a cheeky sense of humour that you didn't really see necessarily in a formal way, and you would have experienced that, I guess.
A wicked sense of humour. I did experience it. The last time I did a charity function with him at Buckingham Palace, not 10 years ago, he kept barracking me, saying, "We've heard that one before, get on with it." Oh, he could be, well, he was a character. And that's, I think, why people loved him. The fact that he wasn't always politically correct. He was his man, and people respected that. People of all ages did. I think people are sensing the loss now in a way that would have startled him, and I hope pleased him.
And just a final thought, you nodded to it, but the statement that we have just had from Prince Charles in the last half an hour, this is a man who's lost his father.
Yes.
What struck you about what he had to say?
Anyone out there who has lost a father will know how he feels. And that's the curious thing about this thing that we have, a royal family. There they are. It's a curious, the potency of it is because it's a mixture of fairy tale and heritage. And yet at the end of the day, as Prince Philip said to me more than once, we're a family. We are a family. And so today we must think of them, the Queen and Prince Philip's 4 children and all his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They are a family, and tonight they're mourning.
Giles Brandreth, very good to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us here at Windsor Castle. Giles Brandreth, who, among many other things, is a biographer of the Duke of Edinburgh and knows members of the royal family well, of course. And the crowds, as you can probably hear and see, are still very much here at Windsor Castle tonight. For now, I'll hand you back to the studio. Kate.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. Jane Hill there. Well, we saw then earlier that 2-minute silence at the Grand National in Aintree to mark Prince Philip's death, and the Duke of Edinburgh's sporting activities did indeed provide him with a welcome opportunity to get away from formal royal duties. For him, sport became an outlet for his restless energy, and Prince Philip proved himself to be a keen and talented competitor in a number of different sports. Our correspondent Natalie Perks looks back at the Duke's sporting life.
Prince Philip always enjoyed sport, and he often excelled at it. At school, he learned to love sailing. As a wedding present, he and the Queen were given a yacht. The Duke took part in the Royal Regatta at Cowes for 50 years, even winning the most prestigious trophy, the Britannia Cup, with his friend Uffa Fox in 1952.
The thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
And now a change of bowling from the pavilion end.
As an enthusiastic cricketer, he also drew praise from high places.
And that one moved across the leg.
He has a perfect action for a right-hand off-spin bowler.
But what you might not know is just how the playing fields around us are a huge part of his legacy. While councils were busy selling them off, his tireless fundraising campaign led to thousands of UK sites being saved.
It's a true testament to his passion and commitment to sport and the opportunities that he saw that sport could create for so many young people who didn't necessarily have access to green space.
The Duke shared the Queen's love of horses and became one of the top 4 polo players in Britain in the mid-60s, cementing the sport as a firm royal favourite. Arthritis ended his playing career at 50.
Go on, you stupid hole! Get on!
But carriage driving became his new passion, and he was instrumental in drawing up the rules. He helped raise its profile and competed for Britain at World and European Championships.
Great Britain was represented by George Bowman.
Fellow teammate George Bowman remembered him fondly.
I was a scrap merchant. And of course, he was a prince. And at times people made a lot about this. But he never treated me any different. He always looked at me like an equal. And that was one of the things I really admired about him.
Despite some hair-raising spills along the way, the Duke carried on well into old age. His passion made sport a family affair.
Well, thousands of people have their own personal memories of the Duke of Edinburgh, having met him at official engagements over the years. On his 50th birthday, 1971, the Queen and Prince Philip visited the shipyard at Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria, where they met twin sisters who remember the encounter to this day. They shared their recollections with our North of England correspondent, Judith Moritz.
Today at Barrow, the first of a new class of British warship takes the water.
The launch of HMS Sheffield in 1971 was a momentous day, a real royal occasion. And for two people in particular, it was very special.
Twin sisters Sheila and Anne present the traditional bouquet to the Queen. The sisters represent the twin industries of shipbuilding and engineering.
50 years on, Sheila and Anne remember meeting the Queen and especially the Duke of Edinburgh.
It was an honour to represent the town.
Yeah. And it's not every day you get to meet the Queen and a prince in one day, is it?
But it was also the 50th birthday of the Duke, so the whole atmosphere was absolutely amazing.
And you remember him putting you at ease?
As he came towards us, you could almost see him smiling. He was dying to ask us questions.
I think he was just so in awe that there was two girls that were so similar that he thought he would have a little joke.
He just said to us, "You're so alike. You really must get up to some kind of fun with your boyfriends and doing swapping." We just laughed it off and said, "No, we don't really."
But of course, the photograph that got caught was this business where he's doing this, which is, you know, do you swap boyfriends? But that was it.
He had a twinkle in his eye.
Oh, yes. Yeah, a little bit of fun, you know what he was like. What's this one? Happy birthday from the gorgeous girls.
The twins were surprised to find themselves in next day's papers. Sheila has kept all the mementos. Which one of you is which?
I'll have to go. I think.
You're not sure?
No, I'm not. Just a minute. We were in every daily paper. And I do remember one of the managers from Vickers at the time said, "Crikey, you wouldn't think that they'd launched a ship yesterday."
Less about the ship, more about you.
More about the twins and his birthday. Yes.
Memories of the day have sadly outlasted HMS Sheffield, which was sunk during the Falklands conflict. As for the twins, they'll never forget the Duke and the fun few moments they shared.
He was a very handsome man, wasn't he? You know,
yes.
He was dashing, wasn't he? Especially when he had his uniform. I mean, who doesn't like a man in a uniform, you know?
You are watching an extended programme from BBC News marking the life of the Duke of Edinburgh. As we've been hearing, his elder son, Prince Charles, has been leading the family tributes to his father. And this afternoon he gave a statement from his home in Highgrove in Gloucestershire. So let's hear again what he had to say.
Good afternoon. I particularly wanted to say that my father, I suppose the last 70 years, has given the most remarkable, devoted service to the Queen, to my family, and to the country, and also to the whole of the Commonwealth. And as you can imagine, my family and I miss my father enormously. He was a much-loved and appreciated figure, and apart from anything else, I can imagine, and we're so deeply touched by the number of other people here and elsewhere around the world in the Commonwealth who also, I think, share our loss and our sorrow. And my dear papa was a very special person who, I think, above all else, would have been amazed by the reaction and the touching things that have been said about him. And from that point of view, we are, my family, deeply grateful for all that. It will sustain us in this particular loss and at this particularly sad time. Thank you. Thank you.
The Prince of Wales then remembering his father, the Duke of Edinburgh. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell joins us back again. Just your reflections then on what Prince Charles had to say there.
Well, I think it was a heartfelt tribute from an elder son who, as we were saying earlier, hasn't always had a comfortable relationship with his father, but that's all water under the bridge. And I think the family, of course, has come together now. This is a family which is sorrowing, despite the fact, of course, that it wasn't a surprise at the age that he was that the Duke passed away just so short of his 100th birthday. But I think, yes, it is a family in mourning, but also, of course, coping with the gaze, the attention, not just of this country, but of the world, which just adds to the pressure. They can't just entirely go away and mourn in private. It will be, for all that it will not be fully exposed to the public gaze in terms of public processions and so on, it will still be a very public in terms of the television attention that will be paid to it, and not just in this country, but throughout the Commonwealth and elsewhere.
I mean, picking up on some of the comments, lovely comments made by Giles Brandreth a little earlier, and I don't know if it just strikes me that in the past 24 hours have allowed people to really remember that significant impact of a life well lived and the service that he gave from the charities that he supported, the Duke of Edinburgh scheme. I was impacted on that personally as a teen. So I think there are so many people that have been impacted positively, and I wonder whether it's just now a chance to remember, after what has been a very difficult year for so many, a chance to remember something positive.
Well, at the end of a life, it is a moment to reflect on that life, and in this case, it is a more than usually long life and more than usually well-lived, and a life full of more accomplishments than most people would achieve during their life, and of course a life which has been on the public stage, a major figure on this nation's stage. So there is a lot to reflect back on, an awful lot of people who have in some way met him over the decades and who will have felt some small personal connection, and all of that of course comes to the surface and is to be reflected upon at the moment of a person's death, and I think that is what is happening at the moment. I think opponents of the monarchy, and let's not forget that there are some, will be tuning out from all of this and will be pretty probably appalled already at the scale of the coverage that is taking place. Supporters of the monarchy, though, would say that this yet again shows that the majority of people in this country instinctively feel comfortable with a constitutional monarchy, with a royal family, albeit a royal family that in recent months has been going through a difficult period. And I think one of the other things that one might hope would come from this whole episode is the opportunities for some healing. Prince Harry will be attending the funeral, and so there will be an opportunity within this special atmosphere of a funeral, when there is a healing moment, a reflective moment. It puts other things in perspective, doesn't it? The death of your grandfather. So maybe some of those little quarrels can now be patched up. The other negative episode for the royal family, of course, in recent months has been Prince Andrew. Now that's more difficult. But it was the Duke and the Queen who put the family at the centre of things, put them on the stage as the exemplars, if you like, of good, positive values. Now, that certainly hasn't always worked out. No, there's no point in hiding that. But the core relationship between the Queen and the Duke was successful, has been successful, despite all the doubts of the courtiers at the time of their engagement. And that, I think, is where people will be focusing on sympathy for the Queen.
Indeed so, Nick. Thank you so much, Nicholas Witchell. There will be more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel. I'll be back with the team for the late news at 10. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.